Century 14 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. I recently had an uplifting conversation with a very smart, very combat experienced, very irregular warfare focused Air Force colonel, right? So relatively senior leader, smart dude, and we're talking about things that excite us, big ideas, big fights. If we went to blows with Russia, or China, or Iran, or North Korea, or the country of Stolichnaya, like what we were going to do. And we talked about the future of warfare, is invigorating, right? And we're talking about like what keeps us up at night, what scenarios, what problems do we see, and what are we going to do about them? What ideas do we have? And he said, Jim, I'm worried that if we get into a big war, like a world war, we, the Air Force, we, the military, are not culturally set up for the sort of military order, obedience, discipline that we will need both among the troops and of our leaders to make sacrifices, to order men to their deaths. And for men to know they're probably going to their deaths and go anyway. And I know he isn't the only senior leader thinking about that. I've heard several say that over the years. And that is sobering on a lot of levels. Now, there are many, many examples in the history of war where leaders knowingly sent their men on suicide missions. And we may see that again. In fact, kind of statistically, we're probably going to see that again. Now, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. Like, ever since he and I had that conversation, I've had to do some soul searching, honestly, about what that meant and what I think about it. I signed the dotted line, knowing I might die in combat, but I try my hardest not to.
Good plan.
I'm a student of Patton, and I love the saying that he had, and it's in the movie Patton about you're not here to die for your country. You're here to make the other poor dumb son of a bitch die for his country. I'm all about that life, right? That's why we talk about gross overmatch and tactics and all that stuff on this podcast, because I don't want to die. I want to make the other dumbass die, right? That said, we also have lots of examples, especially the world wars, right? World War I, World War II, where, there's a lot of attrition. And there was a lot of knowing sacrifice. We're going to hold them here, and then we're going to punch them here, right? Feints and just attrition. At the end of the day, we're going to go charge that machine gun nest. We're going to go charge that island. Every beachhead landing of World War II was like that, right?
There's no good way to assault Normandy, right? Like it was there were gonna be losses. Period.
Yeah. And maybe you can make minor operational changes to minimize your losses or to make every loss count. but man, you're going to take losses, especially when those fights get real big. So especially in the world wars, but also like there were cases of incompetent leaders in those world wars who needlessly sacrificed their own troops. And that is nauseating. And there are several instances. One that might be worth checking out, there's a movie called Gallipoli. It was one of Mel Gibson's first movies. And it, talks about the Battle of Gallipoli. I want to say that was World War I. Pretty sure that was Uno. It is worth watching because it kind of shows the futility of like trench warfare and what attrition warfare really meant, and sending men to their deaths when they didn't have to. And that's just one example of many. And I think about, thinking back to my buddy and the concerns he brought up, I have to, in that soul searching, think like, is that even true? Like, do we have a culture problem where we're not willing to make sacrifices or willing to sacrifice our own guys? And if that's true, is it a problem? Do we need to do something about that? Or maybe it's true and that's okay. Or maybe it is true and it's a big problem and we need to do something about it. Like I said, that it doesn't sit well with me. And I've been kind of nugging on that ever since. One of the reasons why I'm not real comfortable with that discussion is I was a legal studies major going through school. And a lot of what we talked about in legal studies was war crimes, right? It was military law stuff. And, the Holocaust, there were massacres like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And very often when we had those bad outcomes, the perpetrators always said, hey, I was following orders. I'm in the military. I don't get to just say no, right? And, I want you to follow rules and I want you to follow orders, but I always caveat that's up to a point. I don't want you to follow them off a cliff. And there's international law precedent for you have a duty to disobey unlawful orders. And we'll get into that as we go. But like, I want a little bit of rebellion in the troops. We talked about that in a recent episode, right? About standards. And, I need guys to be at least a little bit willing to reject the situation enough to find a solution to those tough problems and not just throw up their hands and be like, well, I guess I'm dead. I don't want you to throw up your hands and say, I guess I'm dead. I want you to go kill the bad guys, right? And along those lines, with that rebellious streak that I honestly want, especially in those special teams, and one of the reasons we encourage that rebelliousness and up to a point is because we carefully select the guys in the special teams. And they also tend to have this complementary streak of being comfortable with a risk that normal troops don't have. So at least in some of those organizations, like you might straight up tell them, yeah, this is a suicide mission. They'll be like, okay, off we go. And one of the classic stories of that was Mogadishu, right? The Mike Durant's helicopter went down and there were two special operators on a helicopter and said, we're going to go get him. And their command and control is like, hey, we can't tell you to go do that. That is way too dangerous. We can't protect you. And they said, that's true. Off we go, right? That was Shugart and Gordon. Both received the Medal of Honor for it posthumously. They saved Mike Durant. So that's the types of people we have in the special teams. We have the guys who are willing to take risks. And that's a little different than the kind of the rank and file. Like rank and file also is willing to take risks, but it's a different magnitude a lot of the time.
I think you have to also distinguish between risk, suicide, sacrifice, and unlawful too, which probably can be hard when you talk about incompetence. Because like you said, you want people to push back. You want people to challenge leadership at times. And rebellious is one thing, but like also you should legitimately be in a place where you can speak up if you think something is fucked up, right? Like, hey, I think there's a better way to do this, or there's another angle here. Like that, I hope, would be encouraged in most places.
You'd think.
And well,
sometimes it is, sometimes not.
But I can imagine a scenario where like, hey, this is absolutely stupid. Like, why would we do that? That's a dumb idea. And for people to want to push back on that, it's like, well, that doesn't make it illegal.
Yeah, an incompetent order is still an order. It's still a lawful order.
Yeah, and so that's tricky because, like, at what point? Follow orders. Like, if you know it's a suicide mission, that's probably the cultural thing. I think that your buddy is tapping into a little bit, because you might have people that are unwilling to be obedient in certain circumstances, and that can be problematic.
Yeah. So diving into the unlawful orders thing, because I think there's something worth digging into on that. Orders are presumed to be lawful, to be binding, unless the person who's getting the order and rejecting it knows that order is illegal, right? So they're presumed to be lawful unless you can prove otherwise. And that's like a thing you're going to have to prove in court, right? They're going to court-martial you. They're going to think about hanging you. And you're going to be like, whoa. That order was unlawful. And they're going to be like, okay, how?
Show me. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us to our next point. You need to have some bright line rules and moral guideposts in the military, and a big one starts and ends with following orders, right? That's part of being in the military. And we need to make that really clear from day one of basic training. We tell you what to do, and you're going to do it, right? And that's part of the culturation that is boot camp and basic training, and that's part of like why we do basic training the way we do it. And that might sound simple, but it's more nuanced than it sounds. I give lots of directions at work. Do they all get followed exactly according to the letter? I would love if that were true. It's not. I receive a lot of instructions at work. Do I follow them all to the letter? I'd love to tell you I do. But
I'll remind you, this is recorded conversation.
Yeah. So yes, I definitely follow every instruction, no matter how silly it is. Obviously. So here's a little things about orders, right? There's no such thing as a direct order. Like, that's a movieism. This is a direct order. No such thing. An indirect order is still an order, right? A suggestion technically is still an order.
Boils down to communication skills.
Yeah. Also, an order doesn't have to be written to be binding. I could just say, you will do this, and you got to do it, right? Therein kind of lies the rub. Commanders have to be very clear when they're giving a suggestion and clear when they're giving orders. And I can count on like one hand the number of times I've given a no shit order in the military. And it's usually over stupid things. Not stupid, but like, it wasn't go storm that machine gun nest. It was things like, your hand is bleeding and you keep taking pressure off of the bleeding. And so I need you to keep pressure on it no matter what. No matter who tells you to show your wound, I need you to keep pressure on your wound. That was one order I gave. I also had a guy show up to my office with pink eye, and I said, "You're going to go to the doctors." And he said, "Well, no, sir, I'm good." And I said, "No, you're going to go to the doctors. This is an order. You're going. Get out of my office." And then I had to burn my office down. So it doesn't happen very often, at least in my role, right? As a military aviator in the community that I'm in, I don't often say, "This is an order, go do this." But I do have to make it really clear when I'm saying, "No, this is a directive, this is an order, you will go do it." And then it's on me if I'm wishy-washy about it, right?
Particularly if you're going to get to a point of enforcing that, like from a legal standpoint.
Exactly. If I'm gonna string you up for insubordination, it's on me to have made it very clear that I expect you to subordinate on this one, right? And orders, when you do give them, they've got to be followed promptly and precisely. And you need to bring the house down on top of people who pull insubordinate shit. Like, that is a thing in the culture of our world we absolutely cannot handle, right? Or we can handle it. You ain't going to like it. Okay. This is also an important area where the U.S. has a crazy unfair advantage by having our NCO ranks. And this is a thing we don't talk about enough in this podcast, is how important the sergeants are and the chief petty officers are in the U.S. military. We have middle management. They're called NCOs. And the thing about them is that officers trust them and the junior enlisted guys trust them. And because of that
two-directional trust thing that they've got going. People do what they tell them. That trust is important. That knowledge inside Private Snuffy's brain, Senior Airman Snuffy's brain, that if he doesn't follow orders, Sergeant Orderly is going to come put a boot up his ass. Right? And when I give an order as a senior officer, relatively senior officer, I know that Sergeant Orderly is going to make sure it gets done. And if that trust breaks down, that's when we know we got a problem, right? And that concept is the core of U.S. military discipline and leadership. And we take that for granted. That's like a given in the Marine Corps. It's a given in the Navy. It's a given in the Air Force. It's a given in the Space Force. I don't know what they call NCOs in the Space Force, but they've got them, right? And a lot of other militaries don't really have that. Go look at how the Russians are leading their troops in Ukraine. They're leading them at the tip of a machine gun. And that is Russian doctrine for as long as there's been a Russia. That's how they do it. Man, I like our way better.
So in thinking about this, Jim presented this as a topic idea, and obviously he's coming from these conversations he had with some senior people that are thinking about big problems, and these are not the sort of problems, obviously, that I deal with on the same scale by any stretch. But I do think it's an interesting topic. And when I think about all of these things, obedience, leadership, but also things like courage and valor and bravado, because when you're telling the guy to storm the beaches of Normandy or the machine gun nest or something, those are some of the things that come into it, right? And it is a very cultural topic. When we talk about being set up for that culturally, and all these things that Jim is describing, I think there's a lot of ways that we can look at this, especially from a practical standpoint, right? One that Jim talked about was the basic training. We indoctrinate people to it. We condition them for it. We train people to run to the sound of gunfire. It just becomes an intuitive response. It's not something we put a whole lot of thought into. We just do it.
In fact, I don't want you to put a whole lot of thought into it. I want you to just do it.
Well, right. Yeah. Thinking about it is not solving the problem. The obedience part of it, similarly, right? It becomes instinctive. Like flank left, whatever it is, right? There's a command. It's just one of those things like, someone makes a call and you just go with it. There's no committee, right? It's obedience. It's indoctrinated. It's cultural. It's conditioned. Another thing that happens when people do start thinking about it a little bit too much, it's like straight up denial. They think like, we got this. We're better than them. We can shoot better. We got better equipment, right? You see this a lot in like the counterinsurgency stuff. People think like, we are so much better equipped and we're so much better shooters and we're so much better. Well, that's not always how it goes, right? But that mentality of, we'll be okay, like it won't happen to me. And maybe to a lesser degree, you think, well, it could happen, but I think the odds are in my favor. Like I can mitigate the risk. I can stack the odds. There's just something to be said about the troops being completely, I don't want to say ignorant to what could happen, right?
We like them young. We like them slightly pissed off. We like them energetic. We like them, trying to prove their manhood. Like that is absolutely, and in some way their womanhood, right? Their mettle as a fighter. But that is absolutely how we recruit and how we train and how the whole military is structured around 18 to 21-year-olds. That's not an accident.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like you could see how when Jim talks about how we might not be culturally set up for this sort of thing. I mean, this is all those little things play into the behaviors that are going to happen when shit hits the fan, right? Like when they're on the boat and like, hey, we're going to the beach, right? Like the beachhead is getting bigger. Like this is happening.
And those muzzle flashes are getting bigger.
Right. I mean, you have to be in this kind of thing. And so we build that from the ground up. some of it's also, speaking of like a training thing and things that we condition, it's a practical thing, right? Like we also condition people to have a template for certain problems. Where like one of the things that Jocko talks about is being default aggressive. I think that's a Jockoism. I don't remember
Bias
for sure.
for action is how we'd say it in my community, but yeah.
Like default aggressive, right? Like in my world, we'd say things like, we press the threat, or we fire and maneuver, we find, fix, flank, and finish. Like we've got a template for certain things. And it just becomes like, hey, this is the problem that we're facing. This is the solution to that problem. And it's just kind of math, right? Like we just go with it. And again, all that thinking has been done in training on a range somewhere, or in a mountain village somewhere, or in a shoot house somewhere. We've done this 1,000 times, and we've made that just the it's in our head, right? It's in our habits. It's a pattern. And it's a predictable thing that we're going to do when things happen. And so in preparation for something like Jim is talking about, storming the beachhead or whatever, you're going to program people for that on some level.
Yeah. So just as an example, how many airborne troops are in the United States Army? I don't know. I'm not an Army guy, but it's approximately 11 billion Army troops are airborne. How many of them have ever jumped into combat? You can count on, I don't know, a couple of hands, maybe your hands and feet. I don't know. It's not a whole lot. And when was the last time we did a mass TAC airdrop? It's been a minute, right? But there's a reason why we do that. If we can get you to jump out of an airplane, we can probably get you to do a bunch of other things too, right? That's part of that.
Well, and kind of like zooming out a little bit, because again, like we don't want it to just be like a bunch of lemmings that follow the orders off a cliff. I mean, we kind of indoctrinate that on some level, right? But the thing is from a strategic standpoint, a lot of the stuff that we do works. Like fire and maneuver tactics work. We're not making shit up, right? Like, and sending guys at the beachhead and then having a bunch of paratroopers come in from behind, like there is some actual strategy in that, right?
Absolutely.
Like, so like we can't ignore that, like, hey, this is just how we trick the guys into going to their deaths, right? Some of it does work, and some of it is rewarded and reinforced because it can be effective. And so we have to kind of like see the big picture on that, because if we think that we might survive, if we think that we might win, we might overcome adversity, right? It gives us hope. And that goes a long way, I think, in terms of how do we send people to their death, right? Like, well, we don't make it a suicide mission. Losses, casualties, attrition is one thing, but it doesn't mean that it's for nothing, right? And man, does that present quite a leadership challenge for the people making those decisions, especially when it comes to battles that we know we might not win.
Oh, yeah. So when most military leaders think about this problem, quote unquote problem, they think in the context of good order and discipline. That is the textbook phrase we use for you send them into danger. Are they going to go or not? That's good order and discipline. And there are lots of leadership quotes. We'll reference some of them as we go. But there's, over the years, we've put a lot of thought into that. How do we get that good order and discipline? And really comes down to like, do your guys follow orders? Do they follow the rules? And usually you can detect that really quickly. Are they wearing their uniforms? Are they showing basic respect to their NCOs and their officers? Like a lot of military units lately, and this is one of the areas where the culture thing is getting weird, is a lot of military units take pride in being on a first name basis with each other. Oh, you don't need to do that, Colonel Bob stuff. I go by my call sign. I'm Viper today, or Curly, or whatever the hell I am. We're in the Guard. We don't really do all that, military rah-rah shit, or we're special ops. So, the team sergeant's really the guy in charge of the team. No, you don't need to listen to the captain. Like that freaks out leaders who are concerned with this type of problem. And maybe for good reason, right? Good order and discipline is important, but I think leaders tend to overlook An even more basic issue, which is expectation management. And we talked about basic training. Think about this. From day one of basic training, yes, we teach you stand up when we tell you to stand up, sit down when we tell you to sit down, left face, right face, do push-ups. But also from day one of basic training to the last day of your military service, you need to make it real clear that this is a dangerous job. And when I say you, I mean like no matter what side of that conversation you're on, you need to be real clear about the fact that this is a dangerous job, that we, the U.S. military, exist to go into harm's way. A ship in the harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. Okay? You signed on that dotted line that you signed over a blank check to the U.S. government on your life, right? Up to and including your life. And also, you need to be real clear, war is a nasty, brutal business. And even when it goes well, it's a nasty, brutal business. And we're not helping anyone if we ignore that or minimize that. That is just reality. So we need to make it very clear. And that expectation management, you'd be surprised how much that helps in this. Help people accept that from day one.
There's a good book called The Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, and I was gonna like pull a bunch of quotes out of this book and talk about it in this episode, but apparently I let someone borrow it, never got it back, which is not the first time that's happened.
I'll get you a copy. I think you can find it on our website.
Yeah, it's great. It's about the Battle of Thermopylae. It's, if you've seen the movie 300, the 300 Spartans, that it is a novel about that story. So it is not a historical nonfiction text. It's a novel, but it talks about, with some historical context, sort of the upbringing of these Spartan warriors, and going into this battle that they knew was not going to probably go well, that these 300 Spartans were going to go and probably not come back. And man, it is a book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It's one of those that, like, I think literally, like, reading it paperback edition, I found myself a couple times just like, oh shit, like out loud, like, Jesus, it's very well done. And there's a lot of great quotes in that book. But what it comes down to at the end of the day is, you talk a lot about, if you think about like the Spartan warriors, right? And they're side by side with their shields, and they've got their spears and all this stuff. And like the strength of that is that everyone is on the same page. And if you talk to anyone, most guys that have been, especially like infantry types, like guys on the ground, anyone in the modern military, a lot of times they'll tell you like, hey, we're fighting for the guy or the gals beside us, right? And that's what it boils down to at the end of the day, was like, we're there to help each other get out of this thing and get back home and live through it. And so there's a whole lot that gets wrapped up into some of these things, and understanding that, like Jim said, we all know that risk is there, right? Like, I mean, not being a military guy, but working in law enforcement, I know that I signed up for a job that requires me to strap on body armor and carry a gun everywhere I go, right? Like, I know that there's risk there. It's not what you're trying to do necessarily, but it's something that you have to like bring into your own,
make your peace with it.
Yeah.
And then do your job
and sort of reconcile that. Right. And part of reconciling that, to me, is about like making sure that I'm doing the work and preparing and stacking those odds in my favor. But I know that I also, the emotional fitness side of it is making sure that I have made peace with it and reconciled those things, so that if today is the day, because you don't get to pick, right? That if today is the day, I know that, hey, I've lived my life, in a way. Like, one of the things that I always would prompt new guys with is, what do you think people would say about you at your funeral? Like, and that's a hard thing to think about, right? But like, what do you want people to say at your funeral about you? Think about it sometime, and think about what they would say and what you want them to say, right? So from a leadership and a command perspective, obviously this gets a lot of attention, but I also think from an individual perspective, reflecting on your own mortality goes a long way here. It's not because you want to, that you signed up to go on some suicide mission, right? But I can think back to a lot of events that I've participated in that after the fact, looking back, I'm like, man, that could have got
That was sketch.
sketch
Yeah.
city, man. That could have gone, like, today might have been the day, right? That could have been real bad. And when you sit back and you think about, like, not only that, but like, what risks am I really willing to take? Like, part of it's just a maturity, right? It's sobering to look at this. Like, do I need to kick that door in? Is this the thing that I want to kick a door down for? Probably not, right? And so that maturity, kind of that sober look at things is a big part of what builds good leaders into who they are. And I think going back to what Jim said about trust, this is where that, like, perspective and experience really matters, because I know that in the work that I do, my team leaders have spoken to this a lot of times, that the positions that they put us in sometimes on our team, they know that, like, hey, this is like, they choose carefully, right? They choose the guys or the gals that they think are ready for, like, hey, this guy's a bad motherfucker. Like, this might not go great. I want to make sure that I'm putting the right people on the job for that, right? And that potentially it's going to change our lives forever. Whatever happens, like, that's a heavy burden that they carry. And it's one that I definitely don't envy.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I hear it so often from senior leaders, is because they recognize that they are sending people in harm's way, and this is a consequential job. Another thing that I've noticed is I tend to hear it more from the strategist friends. There's kind of 3 levels of warfare. There's the tactical level, where individuals are fighting individuals, and operational, where groups of units are fighting other groups of units. And then there's strategic, which is long-term, big picture, geopolitical, all that. I'm a tactician. That's why we have Tactical Tangents as a podcast, is we think tactically, right? That's my specialty. That doesn't mean I don't think about strategy. I do. In fact, that's one of the things we talk about, is I want tacticians who can think about the strategic impact of what they're doing, right? And vice versa. I need strategists who understand tactical reality. Because if we don't kludge, we get bad outcomes, right? We get these wars of attrition when we don't work out right. So think about this in the context of how strategists think and how tacticians think. And kind of the basic strategy game is chess, right? And there may be times where you have to sacrifice a pawn to save a queen. Well, guess who the pawn is?
Here's the thing.
That's the fielded forces. Yeah. Welcome to the team, buddy. So I expect strategists, the generals and the senior leaders and the politicians, I expect they're going to put me in harm's way. They're going to send me. That means risk. That means it might be a suicide mission. But I'm a tactician. It is my job to do what I can to make it a suicide mission for the other guy. And that's not just a cute saying. That is what I've spent my life's work doing, is figuring out how to give myself every advantage and deprive him of every advantage. And that's why I take tactics so seriously. I have a duty to my country, to my subordinates, my troops, and my family to do everything I can to dial up my survivability while still accomplishing the mission and taking that risk. But man, if I can control that risk or mitigate it somehow, I'm going to do it. That's why ORM is such a huge deal for me.
Yeah, this was an interesting conversation. Jim posted, before we recorded this, Jim posted this on Facebook, on his own Facebook page, just kind of getting some food for thought on some things. And there were some really interesting discussion points. And one of the points that I thought was really good and an interesting kind of thought experiment for me was, it had to do with the fact that technology and precision weapons in this era have negated some of the need to shed so much blood to accomplish our objectives. Essentially, that we've spent enough money that we don't have to spend so many people's lives. And I think part of what Jim and his senior leaders are trying to make in all of this is that might not always be true. But modern technology and all of that have shifted our expectations, not only of the troops, but also even of society, right? They don't want to send people off to die. So that shift in expectations is a really big deal.
Yeah, and setting expectations. We already talked about that, right? That's a huge part of this is expectation management is going to eat your lunch on this.
Well, and it's hard because you can't put that back in the box, right? You can't be like, no, but it's like World War I. Like people aren't going to just accept it. They're going to want to diplomacy your way out of it or something, whatever that even means, right? But they're hoping for some political solution or some economic solution or something other than hundreds and thousands of people dying, right? But I think this is a really good point from a people, ideas, hardware perspective, because Boyd spent a lot of his time and effort studying conflict and specifically challenging the ideas of attrition warfare. He talked a lot about what are we going to do? The hey diddle diddle straight up the middle thing. That was like one of his known little phrases that when he talked about the world wars and even like Vietnam, it's just like sending guys into their deaths, and there's got to be a better way.
Right? Yep.
And to a large extent, all of these advancements that we've made, both in not just technology, but also in strategy and tactics, have arguably been the investment in the lives of our people. And that's a good thing. Like it did help. It does help, right? But right now, what we're trying to do is brainstorm the circumstances that maybe that's not going to work. And that's the hard part.
And that is a good point about the tech. Tech is a big part of this. America enjoys a strong qualitative military advantage that is literally U.S. military doctrine, and it has been for decades now. When we looked at the Cold War, we looked across the Fulda Gap at 18 bazillion Soviet tanks. We said, ooh, we are outnumbered. And we are especially outnumbered in our away game in Asia or Europe. That's been true since the Cold War, right? So we spent a lot of time and effort and money trying to regain gross overmatch, which is one of my favorite things, right? I don't want to be in a fair fight. I don't want to be in that 51 to 49% fight. I want to be huge. I want him to be small. I want him paralyzed and scared and confused. And then I want to smash him. So we achieved that to the extent that we have by never being outgunned. We have better planes, we have stealth bombers, we have radars, satellites, computers, radios, smart bombs, standoff weapons, cruise missiles, all that stuff specifically to avoid a war of attrition. And think about war of attrition real quick. Like, think about the movies you've seen, World War I, World War II, Vietnam. Do you think everyone there wanted to be there? Do you think they're all like, oh boy, I get to follow orders today? No, they fucking weren't.
It's going to be awesome.
They're like, this sucks.
Sign me up. Yeah.
And if you ever want to really nerd out on this, look at the desertion rates between draftees and volunteers. You might be surprised which one had higher desertion rates. A lot of that was expectation management. If you know it's going to suck going in, you tend to stick around longer. Okay, so with all that tech, understand that all tech can be defeated, right? Every computer can be virused, every radar can be jammed, every satellite can get smashed, and for every measure, there is a countermeasure. And you gotta know that our adversaries, the people who wish us harm, they have spent decades trying to come up with counters or workarounds to the American way of war. They wake up every day trying to figure out how to get around the stealth bomber. They wake up every day trying to figure out how to spot the F-35. Or to just avoid it. Right? And even for the stuff they don't have a counter for, here's the trouble with like the scale of a big fight. We only have so many smart bombs. We only have so many advanced air defense missiles and only so much gas to put in our jets. For the Air Force, which is the element of this I'm the most familiar with, We measure big wars through our air tasking order cycle. So every 24-hour interval, we task out our available assets to offensive and defensive operations. Send in the bombers, send in the strikers, send in the combat air patrols to protect the strikers, all that stuff. And we pair them to the available bombs and fuel. And send the fleet every 24 hour. We cycle the planes in and out from their bases. And we do it the next day, and we do it again the next day, and we do it again the next day, and we just keep hitting them, and we try to hit them all at once, all the time. Right? That is the American way of air war. So how many nights worth of smart bombs do you think we have? How many nights worth of smart bombs do you think we have far enough forward to matter in the places we might fight? Where do you think they all are? And that concept's not a secret. Like, this isn't some big, Jim's spilling the beans on, all of our vulnerabilities. No, it's not. Like, that is math. It is a math problem. Literally, it's a time, fuel, distance, bombs
logistics,
problem. Logistics
supply
will
and
eat
demand.
your lunch. I read that somewhere. I think Sun Tzu taught me that, or Clausewitz, or one of those, right? In fact, this week, the Air Force's Air University, the program that runs like our command and staff college and our captain's course, they published a no-shit board game. Like an actual, like Milton Bradley style board game to teach this to officers, where you go through the ATO cycle. Yeah. Reverse. To teach this to officers. Hey, you have an ATO cycle and you got to get all your business done quickly or you're going to run out of everything. And once those resources are expended or damaged or destroyed, or the bases they're launching from are destroyed, what do you think happens next? I don't know. I don't want to be there when it happens.
Yeah. So Jim and I were talking about this, and I wanted to bring this analogy because it could be hard to get people to wrap their heads around like this scale of a thing, right? Like if I ask some 25-year-old about like how he's going to think about World War III, that's a tall order, right? Like it's a tall order for us, and I'm not,
So by the way, that 25-year-old has no functional memory of the Cold War, right? Maybe wasn't alive the last time we were getting ready to do one of these, right?
Yeah, right. Or barely like 9/11 for that matter.
Yep.
So we want to avoid the suicide mission. Right. And the analogy for this that I think maybe is a little bit easier to wrap your heads around, and bear with me because I get that it's not the same thing, but it's just a tactics illustration, right? Imagine I'm going to send my dog, right, on an armed suspect, armed violent felon that is running or hiding from the police. I consider if I'm sending my dog on a suicide mission or not. And let's suppose that I have found a guy, he ran from the police, he's hiding in a neighborhood, and he's in a shed in someone's backyard. And he's refusing to come out. I know he's in there. I know he's armed. I could just send the dog in there, and that's pretty predictable, right? That's going to go one of two ways. He's either going to be like, ow, 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 that hurts, get the dog, okay, I give up.
Dog bites man or man bites dog, one way or the other, right?
Right, or he's going to shoot the dog.
Yep.
And, okay, I mean, it's an option, right? Like, we could take the risk. It's just a dog after all. But if I know that it's just going to be a suicide mission, right? I can sit there and I can go, all right, well, if I send the dog in there and he shoots him, then what? Like, I'm still back at square one now. I didn't really gain anything, right? I checked a box maybe in case I have to shoot him, but we didn't gain a whole lot. So what else can I do? Maybe I can use robotics. Maybe I can use chemical irritants. I can put tear gas or pepper ball. Maybe just time. Like, hey, dude, it's summertime. It's 110 out. Like, I'm just going to wait a little bit. It's going to get real hot in there in a bit, right? Maybe just time. Wait him out. Maybe I can negotiate with him. Try to build some rapport, influence his behavior a little bit. Recognize that not every problem is a dog problem. And if I can, I'm going to avoid sending him on that suicide mission just 'cause. Now, this is where it gets slippery, right? If at some point none of that has worked and my option becomes I either send officers in there or I send the dog, then sure, I'm going to send the dog, right? And accept that risk because we've exhausted all of our other options, which is, to Jim's point, part of the exercise. What happens when we've run out of everything? Mm-hmm. The other side of this is, let's say that same guy comes out of the shed and now he's running into the neighborhood and he's armed and desperate. I have to stop that guy, right? And that's one of those scenarios where, yeah, like the dog might get killed in this, but there's a necessity in that. He's running to where innocent people are with a gun. I have to risk the dog's life to stop that person, right? Now, this little thought experiment is obviously not as significant as the stuff that we're talking about. It's just an analogy. But I want to just use it as a way to illustrate the ways that you can think about the ways to avoid or mitigate those suicide missions, but also consider that there still might come that scenario. A senior handler, when I first got in the unit, one of my good friends now told me, like, hey, if you're a dog guy, this might not be the best job for you because you need to recognize that you might have to pat that guy on the head one day and send him to his death. And if that's not something that you're going to be willing to do, then this probably isn't the best place for you, right? And I think, like, when I think about it in those terms, and I think, like, man, I've put a lot of work into this dog. I've invested a lot of time. He's worth a lot of money. He's a good boy. I don't want to send him to his death unnecessarily, right? But I know that what we do is dangerous work, and that might come down to it. That is ultimately his job, and it's part of my job, right, as his handler. So I think that if you take that sober view of this sort of problem, this is the leadership issue, right, is to look at that at scale. And if you don't have the maturity, if you are in one of those leadership roles, right, if you don't have the maturity and the competence and the critical thinking skills, and frankly, just the creativity to think around, like, okay, how can I avoid that? You also need to have those lines in the sand where you go, I might not always be able to. And then what?
Yeah, I want you a little rebellious, right? I want you to say, how can I work around this? How can I solve this problem? Textbook doesn't cover this. Well, I guess I better throw up my hands and give up. No. You don't get to just stop solving the problem.
But there's also that time and place where you go, like, everyone wants to be a gangster till it's time to do gangster shit, right? Like, yep. Send it, yep. Right? Sometimes you just have to accept the risk. And I can tell you, like I said earlier, I've been in a number of scenarios where, looking back, I go, and I've also been in a number of scenarios where I go, fuck, man, this is gonna suck, but here we go. Like, squeeze up when you're ready, right?
Yep.
And then the breach goes, and you go do the thing.
Yep.
So you have to have the maturity and the competence for that, especially if you find yourself in that leadership type of role. And it's not just about thinking about the ways around it, right? You also have to face it. And I think culturally, that's a big part of what Jim is talking about.
So on my first deployment, one of my favorite bosses said, hey, guys, I know you're all gung-ho, but this mission is not worth dying for. I will tell you when it is a mission worth dying for. And I thought that was a good scene setter. In fact, I've used that since as a mission commander. Because that tells me that you are going to tell me when it is the one. You're not just going to be like, okay, bye, have fun storming the castle. Like, you will tell me, hey, this is the one, go take the risk. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. The system works when the troops are gung-ho, they're pushing, and the leaders are kind of reining them in. And there's a thing related to this. There's a saying I love called, if you want buy-in, you got to give people the read-in. In other words, tell me what you're trying to do. You might be a senior commander. I'm an aircraft commander or a mission commander. I need to make 1,000 decisions an hour about how much risk I'm willing to take on a particular sortie. If you send me up to, like, look at clouds, I have to apply a whole bunch of judgment about how low I'm willing to get on fuel, how many little technical maintenance issues I'm willing to, like, let build up, before I cancel the mission and return to base, how bad I'm willing to let the weather get. And if I know, like, hey, yeah, we're telling you to go fly in circles, but cough, cough, nudge, nudge, there's a reason for it, that's going to drive some of my decision making. Or if it's like, no, we need to make our hours for the month. Well, maybe I'm not going to die for that one. Yeah. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's every buddy of mine who flies cargo planes has a story about flying around a combat zone, moving pallets full of tires. And in some cases, they were moving the same tires on the same pallet over and over and over and over. And they started to notice it, and they'd put little chalk marks on it. And what they figured out was someone was sending them on these missions in order to prove their utilization rate. In order to keep having C-130s out there or C-17s out there, they were just making work for them. Well, these guys are, they're in combat. They're strapped up in body armor. They're sweating. They're, potentially going to crash for any of 1,000 reasons. And they might end up evading in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever the fight was. And they were doing it to keep a utilization rate up.
Sounds like a investigation kind of scenario.
Sounds like a dumb reason to die, right?
Well, sure, but also...
Yeah.
Something
fraud, waste, and abuse.
Fraud, waste, and abuse. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I never personally experienced that, just to be clear. But ask any cargo pilot whether they have a story about that. And if you don't tell me why you want me to take off and fly in circles, I'm going to err to the side of conservative. I'm going to be like, nope, we're not accepting that risk today. This concept of explaining why we're doing things, that irks the shit out of old school boomer era bosses. They hate that millennials always want to know why. How come you need to know why? Just do what I'm telling you. Because I'm your boss and I said so. Because I'm your mom and I said so. Like, well, the why is really important. And that's one of the things we've figured out in the last 100 years since World War I, World War II, is that the why actually does matter. If I know your intent, I know how much risk I need to take that day. And I might be able to find a way to get to your intent without ending up as a smoking hole in the ground. So tell me what it is you're trying to accomplish. And maybe it's the biggest secret in the whole world. Cool. So vet me real carefully and then tell me. And for me, this comes down to trust. There are leaders I trust and leaders I don't. I try real hard to be the type of leader my guys can trust. Sometimes I achieve it, sometimes I don't, but I work at it. And every time my commander signs the flight orders, the ones that like send me to go fly a training sortie, he knows he might be putting on his service dress uniform and visiting my wife with the chaplain the next morning to give notification. Every single sortie is potentially my last, right? Flying's a dangerous business. And I do everything I can to make sure that like it's as safe as I can, but flying's a dangerous business. In fact, he trusts me to do everything I can to bring his jet and his crew back in one piece. And I trust him not to send me on a stupid mission. If I don't trust him, this doesn't work. If he doesn't trust me, this doesn't work. If we don't trust our NCOs, this doesn't work. Trust is what this is all about. I love the saying, credibility is the currency of leadership. And there may be a day where you got to cash it all in. So start earning it now.
I would like to think that on some visceral level, among leaders and subordinates alike, that we are all here for basically the same reasons, right? In the kind of work that we do generally where there is some personal risk. Military, obviously I can't speak to, but at least for law enforcement, we all have pretty similar reasons for doing the sorts of things that we do. And we might describe or articulate those things in different ways, but it's part of that glue that binds us together. And I think that when Jim talks about trust, like if we really get down to that foundation, those fundamental things and see that, it's the ethos, right? It's part of the ethos of the work that we do. We recognize the challenges and the risks. We accept those things. And it is in light of those things that we strive to do better, that we learn from our mistakes, that we try to build resilience, that we work hard, we stack the deck in our favor. But obviously we can't deny, we can't pretend that on any given day, our number might get called, like Jim is saying, right? You have to cash it in. And I can tell you that as I slowly start to approach the end of my career, maybe, hopefully, I don't know, this stuff takes a toll. Thinking about this stuff takes a toll. Reflecting on your mortality and risk and all of that takes its toll. And I think that's healthy and necessary and important. And it's good that we all do that and we all talk about those things, because I think that, vulnerability to be able to talk about that is part of what helps build that trust, right? If my bosses tell me that, hey, like, I'm not putting you in that position because I don't think you're ready, or they tell me that I'm putting you in this position because I think you're the guy for the job, it's because we have a clear understanding of all of this, right? And there's a quote on the National Police Memorial, and it goes, "It is not how these officers died that made them heroes, it is how they lived." And I think, though we work in these careers, right, and we might have this, like, go out with a bang kind of ending, maybe, hopefully not, right? But there's always that possibility. As we work through it, right, we go through our military career, law enforcement career, whatever, it is part of what we find purpose and meaning in. And it starts in that indoctrination, the basic training stuff, right in the beginning, like Jim said. Culturally, we see all of these things. We hopefully start to understand the big picture. We know the importance of following orders. We might not know the grand strategy, but over the years, we start to kind of get there, right? And we recognize that at some point, our lives might get punctuated by something unpredictable. Maybe we had some choice in that, maybe we didn't. But everything in between, it all matters. And so when it comes to thinking about those scenarios where you're going to accept great risk, or your people are going to accept great risk, you need to be able to reconcile that in a lot of ways, right? There was a time where a scenario occurred at work, and the good guy, an undercover officer, basically got shot. It was in training. It wasn't a real life thing, right? But one of the people running this exercise handed the guy that wrongfully shot him. It was a misidentification. Really a simple mistake, right? Important, hard lesson, but simple mistake. And he handed him a folded flag. And he was like, carry that around because you're going to have to give it to, his spouse or his family or whatever. It was like, well, fuck. That's a little harsh. I mean, it's real, right? But, like, think about that. Like, the lesson is there. And I don't know that was the way we wanted to deliver that. But it's impactful. And we should be thinking about it in those terms, right? That we're going to send someone to their family's door, potentially, and have to explain what happened. So see the big picture on that.
I have a couple quotations on this topic. And one kind of going to Mike's point about the flag. And it might sound silly in comparison to that, but there's this guy named Colonel Charlie Beckwith. He was part of the founding of a well-known Army Special Operations unit. And while he was trying to structure the unit, some people kind of consulted with him like, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? Battalion size, regiment size. And he's like, no, I want to do it like the SAS. And they're like, okay, have you thought about going down the road to the tortilla factory and just seeing how they do business? Just look at local industry and maybe we can get some ideas from that. And he's like, we're not making goddamn tortilla chips here. Right? This is a consequential job. Hostage rescue is a consequential job. War is inherently consequential. It is a horrible, horrible thing. There's nothing good about it. Sometimes it's necessary, so we better be good at it. Okay? Which I also stole from a general. There's another general, this dude, George Washington. Don't know if you've heard of him. Again, do you think everyone fighting with and for him was like, oh boy, I get to go march across New England today wearing wooden shoes. Like, no.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Wearing wool.
Also, it's snowing.
Yeah. Valley Forge was, I understand, not a super fun time for the U.S. military. He said, require nothing unreasonable of your officers and men, but see that whatever is required be punctually complied with. Reward and punish every man according to his merit, without partiality or prejudice. Hear his complaints. If well-founded, redress them. If otherwise, discourage them in order to prevent frivolous ones. Discourage vice in every shape, and impress upon the mind of every man, from the first to the lowest, the importance of cause, and what it is they are contending for. Well, man, even George Washington wanted to explain the why. But these gosh darn millennials keep asking me about it. Well, maybe he knew something about that.
Motherfuckers.
Okay? As another dude, Major General John M. Schofield's graduation address to the graduating class of West Point, 1879. I don't know a whole lot about Schofield. I know there's barracks named for him, and I know I had to memorize this quote when I was a freshman in college because I went to a super fun college. I'm pretty sure he was in the Civil War, though. Again, do you think that was like a fun time? Do you think everyone's like, "Oh boy, guys, we get to go storm each other with bayonets"? Like, probably not, right? So the Schofield guy, he said, the discipline which makes the soldiers of a free country reliable in battle is not to be gained by harsh or tyrannical treatment. On the contrary, such treatment is far more likely to destroy than to make an army. It is possible to impart instruction and give commands in such a manner and such a tone of voice as to inspire in the soldier no feeling but an intense desire to obey, while the opposite manner and tone of voice cannot fail to excite strong resentment and a desire to disobey. The one mode or other of dealing with subordinates springs from a corresponding spirit in the breast of the commander. He who feels the respect which is due to others cannot fail to inspire in them respect for himself, while he who feels in his manifest disrespect toward others, especially his subordinates, cannot fail to inspire hatred against himself. Now, there's a lot there. Okay? We want soldiers reliable in battle. That's the whole point of this discussion. When we send you, you go. We got to storm the machine gun nest, you go. The beachhead, whatever. But we're not going to get there at the end of a whip. That's how the Russians do it, and they suck at it. The way we're going to do it is with leadership. The way we're going to do it is by being honest and upfront with our dudes. We're going to show them respect. We're going to explain to them the why, and we're going to let them impress us with how good they are at it. And if we can't do that, we have no business being here, because this is a consequential business, and we ain't making goddamn tortilla chips here. I think that's all I got, Mike.
Same. I was trying to find a quote from The Prince by Machiavelli.
Another uplifting book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Since we're pulling up historical stuff, it's another interesting book to read, though, when it comes to some of these sorts of things. I'm not going to bother with the quote at this point, but there's a lot of material out there on this, and I think the biggest takeaway is to just have a sober look at this. I mean, it's great to try to outsmart everything, but we still need to have that what if and wrap our heads around that. I mean, there's just no way around it. That's all I got.
Be safe out there, be smart out there, and lead. Do the leading thing.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show. So when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters. That's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.